Amazing memories, really. Oh, yeah, right. I'm so used to walking around, you know. Okay. All of these amazing memories. I don't know where he found that quote. I totally forgot I said that. Although we were talking about going to the hearing and how much, trying to get more money for the ethics. But I think everybody sort of remembers their past, where they grew up, what started out, where we came from. And I would like really to say thanks to the people, my DNA, okay. That's my family, Lake George, my dad. Can you guys see? I know it's sort of dark. I mean, this little light here. Can you actually see? See okay? My mom. My sister was about 9, and mommy was about 6. And that year was like the mid-1950s. My mother had just found out that all 3 of her brothers had gotten diagnosed with Huntington's disease the same day. Her brothers were jazz musicians, played in, Tavern on the Green for New Yorkers, traveled all around, and were musicians. And when my mom was 17 or 15, she went with her mother to a psychiatric hospital in Long Island, in upstate New York, actually, not Long Island, where she found that her own father had died of Huntington's disease. And the doctor actually had diagnosed it as Huntington's chorea. When you think about, that was back in the early, almost 1800, way turn of the century. How did they know that? Got the right diagnosis. And my mom, being very smart, went to the library, checked out a book, read Hereditary Disease Affecting Only Men. And since she had 3 other older brothers whom she loved and adored, she said, okay, I'm going to go save their lives. So my mom became a science teacher. She studied fruit flies at Columbia, where I now work, and she was going to save her brothers. But since she didn't think she was at risk, she never told my dad that this was even in the family or even a possibility. Because I think there was stigma back then, there's stigma now. I think she felt, well, she didn't want to rock the boat. So when we were all born, she found out that all of her brothers were going to develop Huntington's and die of Huntington's. And when she told my dad, they found out, in fact, that she had a 1 in 2 chance of also getting it. And if she got it, my sister and I would have a 1 in 2 chance. So we hoped for the best, moved to Los Angeles, and my mom was doing jury duty. They have these great big gigantic crosswalks in Los Angeles, and she was 8 o'clock in the morning, jury duty, walking across the street, and a policeman started just screaming at her, how can you be drunk so early in the morning? Aren't you ashamed of yourself? 8 o'clock in the morning. Of course, my mother didn't drink, was horrified, called up my dad, and she was diagnosed that afternoon with Huntington's in 1967. So you heard some of these dates that Francis was talking about. That was a year after Woody Guthrie passed away with Huntington's. And one of the first things my dad did actually was to meet the Guthrie family, because I think all of us felt we were really fighting a scourge together. In 1968, we founded the Hereditary Disease Foundation, to find the cure. Why not? Right? Now, we were very fortunate. And we said, just what Francis was saying, you got to get the best and the brightest, the most innovative, phenomenal scientists in a room. Don't give speeches, because everybody goes to sleep in the speeches, and they all wake up and they say, well, what was she talking about? So you just get people in a really tiny, small room for 2 days. You give them really good food. You give them something to drink. Walk around for weekends at a time. And we always invited families with Huntington's to talk to the scientists. It's not, some abstract thing. And we have had workshops, now many thousands, ever since 1968. We still have workshops because we're still looking for the cure. And it's very intimate. People get to know each other, they trust each other, and we also tell them, look, you have to speak English because every scientist kind of has their own slang. So you have to, you have to speak English so that the person next to you understands. And I think that has really been extraordinary. So in 1979, we had a workshop organized by David Hausman at the NIH. This is before Francis was here or any of us were here. We said, let's have it at the NIH. Bring people, those people that Francis showed, David Botstein, Ray White. Now, this is 79, okay? This is before they published the paper. Jim was actually a student with David Hausman, and at that point, we weren't inviting students. So Jim was too young, and Marcy was still even more too young. So we're talking about, the very beginning of the beginning. But, and Jim was working with David Hausman at MIT, and all these guys were at MIT. And people were talking about this. Could you find a way to find the Huntington's gene? DNA is very unusual. It's very fancy. And people were making markers, you had to actually sew a marker. You had to make this cloth, you had to make this, you had to make your hair stuff. People were actually making them, and Jim was saying it was what number it was, because people were making these things out of whole cloth. And it had taken Ray White 2 years. 2 years to make one marker and figure out where it was. Because even back then, everyone said, okay, look, plants have markers, animals have markers, we don't. We're so sophisticated, right? So nobody even wanted to think about, well, guess we do. We do have all these markers. We have DNA markers, just like everyone else, and we need to find them. And the point of finding a marker, it's what Francis was talking about in the beginning of his talk. You find a marker because markers have homes. It's like right here, you have congressmen, you have the president, you have NIH. You say, okay, where can you find these people? Washington. Okay, Washington. Got to go to Washington. Because they had homes on chromosomes. A marker had a home, and its traveling partner was the Huntington's disease gene. Now, in October of 1979, how many people were even born? You don't have to tell the truth. You can lie. There were, we didn't know anything. We really didn't know anything. Nothing. But we hoped. So, at this workshop, the key, and Francis touched on it, the key to finding your marker is a really big family. Because you had to see, does your marker hang out with Huntington's disease in the family? Okay. So this is October 79. In July of 79, same month, I had gone to Venezuela because we were family hunting. And we said, okay, I know some big families. Of course, we didn't quite appreciate how big they were. And really, we were also looking for a double dose because we thought maybe that would give us a clue. So we went down to this stilt village in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of Lake Maracaibo. You can see the little teeny tiny boats there are the way you get around. It took like almost 5 hours, but you had to drive another 5 hours and take another 10 hours. And then one day, our entire team almost drowned on the way home. And so it was quite an odyssey. But those families, both actual families, really gave us the gene. And we used to send them to Jim's home, and then he said he's getting an infestation of red ants and send him someplace else. Remember that, Jim? Uh-huh. So when we said, okay, a big family, it turned out that we have a family tree of over 18,000 people. They have all inherited from one woman, very fortunately in conception, who had it in the early 1800s. But Maria Concepcion had over 18,000 people, 14,000 are alive, and most are under 40. So we started putting together the family trees. We took pictures of everybody, and most of the way we took, the family tree is he'd say to the person, stand up underneath your Polaroid. That's our family part of it. With a little tiny Polaroid, we said, you stand there, tell me who's your relative. And that's how we figured out their families. And it was fantastic, actually. 10 generations, but there also were a lot of other families, as part of that family tree. And when we were thinking back in the 1979, when we started out, we thought, okay, really the big conversation at that workshop, you had to map the entire genome first, okay? You had to map the genome first, and then once you found, all the markers, then you look for the Huntington's disease gene. And there's a huge, big argument, because it could take 50 to 100 years, to map the genome. The optimist said, maybe 10 to 15. The pessimist said, you're never going to do it at all. It won't work. There are a lot of people who really thought it wouldn't work at all, and that it was ludicrous that we were thinking of doing this. And at one point, David Hausman, the organizer, had a stroke of genius. He said, well, look, what if you just really collect a huge family every time you find a new marker, see if it hangs out with the Huntington's gene? And we gave David Hausman the very first grant of like $7,000 to actually go out and find the Huntington's disease gene, which is pretty astonishing. And I think, I'm going to have to just say this and talk to Frances afterwards, because I think Frances was trying to sort of build up some of the drama for the next step, but in finding the marker. So in 3 years, in 1983, we found the marker. Now, Frances showed you a pedigree of an American family, and that was the biggest American family that we actually could find, and it came from Iowa, and they gave their cells. If we had just studied the American family, we wouldn't have found the Huntington's gene, because if you have to see if something actually is significant, you have to have a score of 3. Okay, the American family gave us a score of 1.5, and we would have just gone home. Okay, but at the meantime, we were collecting all the Venezuelans, sending them to Jim, sending them to Marcy, sending them to all kinds of other people. And because of Venezuelans, so that they were the families that he didn't show, because of Venezuelans, were so gigantic. they themselves were over 3. So when we combined the Venezuelans and the Americans, we had over 6, which means that there's like 1 billion to 1 odds against that our marker was just by chance. It blew everybody's mind because it wasn't supposed to work. And then all of a sudden, by combining these two families, we found it. And there's no question. There was no question. You know, it was just 1,000,000% that this was the real deal. And even Jim Watson said finding the marker in 83 is what gave him courage to launch the Human Genome Project, because we did it. Okay. And again, see now if you had a pointer, so the really tall guy in the back is Francis. This is where the gene hunters used to meet about 4 times a year. Once in Isla Morada, thanks to the Shea family, who's a family with Huntingtons. Very gracious, they would host us every year. And let's see, you need Jim is there, David is there, the late John Wassmuth, Marcy's there, Mike Keneally, who did all the linkage and the lot score, and the second from the end is Bob Horvitz, who then won a Nobel Prize for studying cell death genes. And next to him, Joe Bates made the very first mouse model of Huntington's. And they are still all really, 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 working on this. But still, we were close, but we didn't have the gene. And as Francis said, the gene hunters, I sort of liken it to climbing Mount Everest naked. Because you had to invent the clothes, you had to bring the oxygen, you had to go back to base camp, you had to not fall off a crevice. You guys, the entire time you were doing it, you were making stuff up from scratch. David, Marcy, Leslie Thompson, every single person. We had 6 people who were really, really, labs, as Francis said, in Europe, all over the world. Jill and Hans were in London. Everybody collaborating and sharing. And if we didn't share, we probably still would never have found the gene because it was so hard. Chung Ho was there. Ira was there. It was really hard. It was just hard. But again, the families made a difference. So this little girl's part of a family who she lived in Still Village. They were 7 of the 9 kids have juvenile Huntingtons. And her little brother was the youngest kid we'd ever met with juvenile Huntingtons. He got sick at 2. The very first time in 79, I met their family. It died at 11. And their family, we gave us the gene. Their cousins, their first cousins, both had 14 kids. Both parents had Huntington's. Some had a double dose, a single dose, some even normal. So in that Still Village, those people actually, literally, their DNA and their information gave us the gene. And Francis showed that. But that's what we're celebrating, 20 years ago. Francis emphasized that the authors were the collaboration, which is very unique. It still is unique at any point. And definitely, when people otherwise would compete. So people, they shared because they understand Huntington's really tough. And they don't want to make it more difficult. So what do we find? Huntington's on the top of chromosome 4. It has too many CAGs, which is a recipe for glutamine. A certain number in a row make a normal protein. But if you have too many in a row, that's an abnormal protein. All of us have the Huntington's disease gene. It's just what band you have. People talk about whether you're positive or negative. That's just complete nonsense. You should eliminate those words from your vocabulary. All of us have Huntington's. It just depends what's the flavor. Now, we also found from looking at the Venezuelans that your repeat length actually has a big impact on when you get sick. So about, if you have 60 or more repeats in a row, and the little boy had about 109, 108, you get sick 20 years or younger. If you have between, let's say, 40 and 50, you can get sick at a huge variety of different ages. And actually, in looking around the world, 90% of us have the Huntington's in the 40 to 50 range. And the good news is that all of us have the same gene worldwide. So that means that every single person, the cure is going to help everybody. So that's very gratifying because, you're working for every single body to be cured. And we sort of thought, well, there isn't a dose effect, but, Marcy might talk about that. We thought, okay, some people got it at 2, some at 69. In Venezuela, the average age of onset is 34, which is a little bit younger than most places. So we said, well, how do you figure out to get it in 69? In the States, a woman got it 97 or 92 years old. So, what are they doing right? We want to rub off on us. What are they doing that we can learn from them? So we started looking for modifiers. We said, okay, if the repeat length, if you take a repeat length out of, if you forget about the repeats, that really the repeat, if you're just looking at, between 40 and 50, the size of the repeat counts for less than half of your age of onset. And almost 21% is other genes and other chromosomes. So we started looking for those, as well as environment, which could be food or toxins or who knows what. So that means, again, if we can find something that would push it out of the lifespan, that would be glorious. And because we feel also very indebted that the Venezuelan families were able to start the human genome and make it possible, we just recently took some of the Venezuelan family and are working with doing whole genome sequencing, again, to look for these modifiers. And that's a first, because that was the first whole genome sequencing at Columbia. But it's really full circle, because since they helped invent it, now we're going to take advantage of it. The families, though, are extremely poor. This is the way they, people live. You're going to recognize Ira Schulson right over there. Why don't you wave, Ira? This is Ira and Ann Young. Ann was the, until like last year, but the 20 years of her life as the chair of neurology at Harvard. And the two of them are taking skin fibroblasts from a gentleman in La Ganeta. Now, what Francis was talking about, that you can use these cells as a test tube for treatments, that's what we're doing. So again, having people there benefit. With juvenile Huntingtons, it's just very, very, very common there, unfortunately. And taking care of children with juvenile Huntingtons is one of the reasons why we started what's called the Casa of God, or the nursing home. Because, again, we were just devastated by the kind of poverty people had. We, since 1979, we donated over $17 million towards the care and sustenance of the families. Dr. Margaret Young, who for the last 25 years has been just part of the Huntington's Disease team and head of the Venezuelan group. feeding a little girl. We care for more than 65 patients. So there's almost, there's no room for anybody to even sit. We feed hundreds of people daily. People, need over 5,000 calories because, just to maintain your weight. They're fed 7 times a day. And people, you just kind of open the doors and people come in from the outside. Twice a day, people come in and are fed. We also provide medicines. We ourselves pay for it, or we give them the money down there to pay for it. Antiparasites, antifungals, antibiotics, psychiatric medicines, since HD affects every aspect of mood, movement, and memory. Tetrabenazine, which was a fantastic donation from Limbeck. We see about 70 people, Margot and the team, actually treat and take care of 70 people each week who come from all over the place. And this is some of the team. That woman is one of the nurses. So Margot, as a family physician, really has been there since the inception. And there's 2 just really extraordinary nurse practitioners. I think what's really critical is right from the beginning of the opening the nursing home in 1999, our rule is that the staff is entirely Huntington's families. You have to be a Huntington's family to work there. So 30 staff work there, all family members who have Huntington's. It's only, first of all, they're totally ostracized. They can't get jobs otherwise. People treat them like lepers. But it gives them dignity, gives them training, and they're taking care of their own family members, their own cousins. And so that's some of the staff just on a day. There's like 30 in all. Okay. So I mentioned that Huntington's is the same everywhere, but there are different, and we're doing worldwide prevalence. We started to look at the UK because in the UK, people have GPs, and you could actually find out in people's general practice records how many people. You're saying 0. Can I? So actually, London seems to be the least crowded, and the northeast and Scotland. By looking at, we took a 20-year period from 1990 to 2010, and looked at how many people have a GP in which they had their diagnosis of Huntington's put in. We've talked a lot about stigma, and I don't even know you could do this actually in the States, because you don't have GPs and you have a lot of stigma, which is why we did it there. And the amazing thing is that over a 20-year period, the number of people with Huntington's literally doubled. It actually, went all the way to less than 6, more than 12. Now, the likelihood is that's happening here too. It's just that, we can't find out about it. And more people with Huntington's were actually in a later age group. We have more people in the 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s. And again, how come they are living so long? What can we learn from them? Juvenile Huntingtons decreased by half. What's that about? Venezuela, it just seems to be increasing and increasing, but not there. We also looked at what kind of medicines they were taking. And, you can see for the kids all kinds of different medicines. Now, I also was very critical in trying to figure out what are the best treatments to give people. Creatine, probably a lot of you are in a creatine study. Tetrabenazine, tetrabenazine has been, I think, really a godsend to a lot of HD families around the world. And this was a study that Ira and the Huntington Study Group did, looking to just see. Now, the critical thing is, right now, everything is very evidence-based. You have to have evidence that something works. Or your insurance won't pay for it, for one thing. But also, your doctor needs to know, and you need to know, is this going to help you? So with tetrabenazine, there was an extremely carefully programmed trial done by the Huntington Study Group. And 91 people started. Most of them were on tetrabenazine. It lasted for 12 weeks. And then the placebo group and the tetrabenazine group had the drug withdrawn. Now you'll see, after 12 weeks, the chorea really almost disappeared. And the placebo doesn't get any better. And when you take tetrabenazine off, the chorea returns. And that's why tetrabenazine actually was licensed right here in the United States for Huntington's families and by the FDA. A lot of you marched, on Congress to get that done. But we still have like an unbelievably, it's just a hodgepodge of what people are taking. One person likes this drug, another person likes that drug. We don't have any way to sort of systematically sit down and say, let us look at what drugs should be done, what's the evidence, and what are the symptoms. I still think that the guidelines for testing are very good, and we should try to emphasize that because people think, it's old hat. But until we have an actual treatment to make a difference, they're not old hat. The research priorities that I know, Jim and Marcy are going to be talking about this also, but gene silencing, turning off the protein so it doesn't make you sick, making it disappear. And symptomatic treatments, we need many more. And, just that whole hodgepodge, we could do better. In Venezuela, we know that there are 5,000 kids who are going to die. Worldwide, there's many, many, many more who are at risk or dying. And I think we owe it to them to do better. There are many people, even people in the room, that I would love to thank, but since I'm told I'm short on time, there's one person that I definitely want to thank, because my dad actually started the Hereditary Disease Foundation after he had his 60th birthday, and he said to us, look, he said, when you're young, you have to shoot for the moon. Okay, most people were saying, 60, are you kidding? But he was always very enthusiastic, supportive, and he passionately believes in the power of knowledge and science and communication to change the world. So I thank all of you for letting us continue his message. Thanks.